I think that's one of the most difficult ones. That looks more like just probably Mark is confused. That's a difficult one.
Stas asks you, are there any differences in the Gospels that you don't think are adequately explained by appealing to compositional devices such as literary spotlighting?
Yes, I do. I think some of the most difficult ones, perhaps the most difficult one, I think would be, in my opinion, is the location of the feeding of the 5,000. And I get into detail with this, a lot of detail in the forthcoming book, more than I can cover right now. But in that case, you've got Mark. He doesn't identify where it is, or the feeding of the 5,000. He doesn't say where it is. Luke says it was in Bethsaida, okay, or very close to it. Now, if you imagine the Sea of Galilee, this will be helpful. If you imagine the Sea of Galilee, it kind of looks like the continent of Africa, kind of. But if you imagine it as a clock, all right, because it's just the top half of the clock that's really important here. Bethsaida is around 12:30. Capernaum is between 10 and 11 o'clock, all right? And and the Gerasenes, that land over there, or what is it? The region of Gerasa, I think it is. I might be wrong with that, okay? But the region over there is a little bit lower than Capernaum. That's around 9 to 10 o'clock. All right, now, with that in mind, Mark doesn't tell us where it occurred. Luke says it happened in Bethsaida or very close. So imagine around 12:30. John and Matthew, they don't really give a location, but for what they say afterward, they're pretty compatible with Luke here. Now, what's interesting is what happens afterward. After he feeds the 5,000, he sends his disciples to cross the lake. That doesn't necessarily, when the word that's used there doesn't necessarily mean, directly across. It could be just a little bit or whatever. But they're supposed to cross the lake. That's when a storm comes up. Jesus had been praying after he dismissed the crowd, goes up on the mountain and prays. So afterward, he comes walking across the water. And so they cross the lake and they end up in Capernaum. All right. And pretty much, so you got Matthew, John, is compatible with Luke here. Okay, they're supposed to cross the lake from Bethsaida, and you cross the lake, you go over to Capernaum, so you're going from 12:30 to 10, 11 o'clock. That makes sense. That works. What's really interesting is in Mark, Jesus says, cross the lake to the other side. Now remember, he doesn't say where they were, but he says he told them to get into a boat and to cross over to Bethsaida. Well, how can you cross over to Bethsaida when, according to Luke, that's where you started out? Well, you might try to explain that that's really difficult, I think. That's really difficult unless you want to engage in that hermeneutical gymnastics of some sort. Okay, and then they land in Capernaum, right? So they're supposed to cross over to Bethsaida and they land in Capernaum. So was Jesus wrong then or what? And someone might say, well, they got in the boat. They were supposed to cross to Bethsaida. Maybe they walked far away from Bethsaida and he told them to get in the boat and go on back. Well, how come the boat's over there when they landed in Bethsaida? That's a problem. But then it could be, okay, they get in the boat. They're supposed to go to Bethsaida. They get blown off course. They end up in Capernaum. Well, the problem is, according to John's gospel, when they landed there, it says they landed where they had intended. So I think that's one of the most difficult ones. That looks more like just probably Mark is confused. That's a difficult one. I think the infancy narratives are really difficult. As Jonathan Pennington, my friend at the quite conservative Southern Baptist Theological Seminary says, I don't think Jonathan's is as conservative as a lot of those. Jonathan, I think, is a great scholar. Studied under Richard Bauckham, got his PhD from Bauckham. And Pennington, in his book, Reading the Gospels Wisely, says that, hey, if we didn't know better, it appears that the infancy narratives in Matthew and Luke are describing two different individuals because there's so little overlap between the two stories. There are a couple of details in the resurrection narratives that I think are difficult to account for by the literary devices, that compositional device that I've identified. That's not to say that there are other literary devices that I haven't seen wouldn't account for them. I just didn't see them. I do think in both the cases in the resurrection narratives that compositional devices are responsible for the differences. I just don't know what they are. But honestly, it does appear to me that Mark is confused. And I don't think there's a compositional device that would account for the difference in the location of the feeding of the 5,000, but I could be wrong. So those are ones that I have difficulty with using compositional devices.